Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call to order this session of the Tacoma Park City Council. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Mayor Stewart,
Here?
Councilmember Kovar,
Here.
Councilmember Dabala,
Yes.
Councilmember Costick, Councilmember Siemens,
Present.
Councilmember Smith, Councilmember Searcy. Here.
Great. All right. This is a special session of the Tacoma Park City Council, our Monday budget reconciliation session. We will have public comments this evening, and we'll start here in the auditorium. If anyone has public comments, please come to the podium, state your name and where you live in the city, and you have 3 minutes. Everybody else is staff, so okay. Except for Arthur. Pseudo staff.
Losey, and I have bad eyesight, so I'm gonna. Okay, I want to thank you for taking the time to hear from some of us. I greatly appreciate what distinguishes Tacoma Park from other cities: its heart, its brains, its dedication to putting resources into social and environmental needs of our community, and to leading more broadly by example. Thank you for your roles in helping make us what we are. I am testifying today because I fear an impending breakdown for Tacoma Park in that and other regards due to an undisciplined process of identifying and pursuing city budget priorities. The process of developing the budget is too freeform, and the outcome is a conglomeration of wish lists that doubles as a proposed budget. That's not a good process, and it shows in the budget outcome. There's really no reason for a community like ours that a community like ours should require a higher property tax rate along with higher assessments to meet its annual budget needs, especially in the context of additional federal funds due to COVID. It would be one thing if every proposed expenditure were a must-have, but you have to agree that many are not. Many seem very much like nice-to-haves, as if additional resources were somehow not an issue. Further, the need for individual city services changes over time, and I'm not sure the litany of past expenditures are reviewed with that reality in mind. What can we let go of, in addition to what should we put in? Indeed, some of our legacy expenses, although a tribute to past progressivism, may now be best retired. Municipal trash collection and recycling program is an example. Great value when we were leading the county, but now the county is doing a better job of it than we are. Does this mean I'm about to run out of time? Okay. So why haven't we claimed victory and moved on, letting the county do what it now does better than we? Do we really need a K-9 unit, or is it a nice to have? If the latter, we really should not add it to an already rising tax burden driving out lower income property holders like myself. We are a small community, but city staff seem to want to pursue large development projects like the community center expansion. Necessary repairs and upgrades are one thing, but the kinds of things that are being proposed for that building are quite another. Are we pursuing these projects only because we can get some partial state or county money by doing so? Are they actually vanity projects and programs? Further, we are not taking care of the programs and facilities we already have. Many sit latent, and sometimes places are needing help, like the parks that we have around us.
That is now 3
Okay.
minutes.
That'll do it then.
Thank you so much. Thank you for coming this evening. Any other public comments in the auditorium tonight? All right, seeing none, we will move to public comments online, and I think we have Mr. Eubner first.
Am I up, Jesse? Oh, there you go.
Here we go.
Are you ready for me? You got me clear?
Go ahead.
Oh, good evening. Paul Hubner, Ward 3. I have attended over a dozen meetings about the proposed budget and the tax rate increase. Some of these meetings were held by council members, and I thank them. I have heard residents' ideas about how to stem this proposed budget increase. Among them were the following: One, demystify the budget. The Tacoma Park budget is 270 pages long. Hyattsville's is 99 pages. Our document is overly long and seems contradictory and obtuse. Two, the city has 5 administration units, some with their own payroll departments totaling over $3 million in city costs. Why the city needs so much administration is something that needs to be addressed. Three, it costs the residents $8.1 million this year to put 43 sworn police officers on the street. Four, the city has added 13.63 FTEs in 5 years, 2.72 per year average, and 6.65 this year alone. Five, some residents recommended that the city transfer police dispatch to the county. And several residents suggested going so far as to eliminate the police department and transfer policing responsibilities to the county or converting ours into a county substation. Seven, eliminate the fleet of new police SUVs. At $477,000 for 6 vehicles, the cost is $1,100 per month per vehicle on a 5-year loan. Eliminate take-home vehicles for non-patrol officers. The specious argument that money comes out of the equipment reserve is ludicrous since all the money is from residents' property taxes. 8, identify and explain the 54 police vehicles in the 2021 Consolidated Annual Financial Report. 9, do not fill the vacant police captain position. We currently have a chief, a deputy chief, a captain, and a lieutenant. 10, eliminate the ERT SWAT team, which is very seldom used, and the county has one. 11, eliminate the K-9 unit. 12, subcontract the speed camera enforcement and monitoring. 13, use the proposed LPRs for parking enforcement, not speed or resident tracking. 14, cut the conference and training allocations. 15, decide whether the city will self-perform functions or hire consultants. We can no longer afford both. 16, reduce the planning staff. We have multiple plans on the books, still waiting, and others that are years late, some even without budgets or completed plans. All these things can and will not be done, but they need to be looked at critically and with discrimination. The residents want services, not more administration, more FTEs, more overhead, or more bureaucracy. Cut the tax rate to the constant yield. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hubner. Next, I think we have Mr. Is Tom with us? Trying to, oh, is it Sue Miller?
Here I am. Tom Gagliardo is here.
Oh, okay.
All right, thank you. First of all, I want to endorse what Paul Hubner said, especially his closing comments about looking at his suggestions critically and honestly. I sent written questions to all of you earlier today. I'm only going to ask the overarching question, which is, according to this morning's post, even though Montgomery County has increased expenditures, they're not increasing taxes. And then there was a political comment about whether that's because they've received ARPA funds or whether it's because the county executive has budgeted wisely. That's not the debate that I'm interested in having with you or anyone else. But I do ask the question, since the city received a fairly generous amount of ARPA funds, how is it that we're talking about such a large tax increase? But more to the point, I'm going to again say that I endorse Mr. Hubner's comments. I think they're well taken, they're thoughtful, and they deserve your time and attention. Thank you.
Thank you. And now we'll go to Ms. Sue Miller.
Sue Miller, Ward 3. Good evening. I was here on April 13th saying most of the things I'm going to say again tonight. At that time, I was hoping it was early enough to have some effect on the budget. At this point, I'm here mainly to try to begin a discussion on what we can do differently in the next budget cycle, because this budget process is broken. It's not okay to start with the proposed budget based on a wish list, resulting in a budget increase balanced entirely by a tax increase. It's not okay to just say you're going to try to get the tax rate down to where it was, because with rising assessments, a level tax rate means increased taxes for us and increased revenue for the city. It's not okay that our staff and our budget keep growing while the city stays the same size. And it's not okay that those facts are buried in an impenetrable budget document filled with obfuscatory language. It's not okay that we never talk about which services the city needs to provide and which services could be better provided by the county. I'm not opposed to ever increasing taxes, but it's not okay to increase taxes in a year when we received huge ARPA sums that were misspent on additional staff and building renovations. But you're going to pass this budget anyway. So what happens next? The time to start on a new and better path is on May 25th, immediately after your budget vote. And that process needs to start with residents, not staff or consultants. There are many residents who are budget experts and would be glad to serve. We can and must create a systemic evaluation of how our money is being spent, which services we could let the county provide, and how to get our budget and our taxes back under control. It's your job as our city council to demand a transparent and accountable and appropriate budget and to fix this broken process. Thank you.
Sorry. Next, oops, I lost my list. We have Megan Schreibner.
Hi, my name is Megan Scribner and I live in Ward 1. I'm here tonight to ask you to not increase our property taxes. Tacoma Park residents already pay more than anywhere else in Montgomery County. While I love living here, it is becoming more and more difficult to afford to do so. I find myself mystified why we're in such a state of affairs. How is it that we continue to add new services, hire staff, take on huge and costly renovations as if we have no limits and money to burn? As if a town of 17,000 can afford to take on lavish projects like the proposed library renovation. As with all budgets, the city needs to look at existing revenues and base its expenditures on that. Then, if the city council, mayor, manager, and staff believe that more revenues are needed, they should identify what the additional funds would be used for and justify the need, rather than asking us to pare back a bloated budget based on pie-in-the-sky wishes. I know it is difficult to cut back or not take on new and exciting projects. We all have projects that are near and dear to our hearts, but we are adults. And as adults, we know we can't have it all and we have to live within our means. To help you in making the decisions of what to fund and what to cut back, I urge you to engage the residents. I suggest you do this through a detailed survey sent to all residents and then meetings throughout the city. Outline the budgets and services of the different departments, the goals and who they serve, and ask us to say what we're willing to sacrifice for the greater good, including the needs of those who might not have as much as we do. Ask us what we are willing to give up, to take a careful look at what services the city should provide and what ones we should turn over to the county. There is no shame in deciding that we can no longer cover all of them and that the county with its economies of scale can do a good or better job for less money. Please reconfigure the budget so that it lives within its means. Above all, please understand that leaving the property tax rate at its current rate still constitutes a tax increase. To have any semblance of trying to keep our city from being less affordable than it already is, and to truly live within our means, the only option is to lower the rate to the constant yield rate. That is the only responsible course of action, especially in a year when the city is receiving significant ARPA funds and county reimbursements are rising. I also agree with Sue Katz-Miller. I suspect that this is all going to be passed, but it's really time to change the process, to take a serious, careful look at what we can do differently. I've suggested some ways of going about that. I think many of us would join in to help with this process because we can't keep doing this year after year where we just come up with these processes and budgets that don't fit our needs. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Next, I have Byrne H.
He
No?
does not seem to be on the call.
Okay. Next, I have Robert Dreyer.
I'm on the call. I'm here.
Oh,
Is this Robert Dreyer?
This is Brian Kelly.
sorry, Byrne.
who-
It was, the sign up was Byrne H and
Yeah.
something else. Sorry about that. Go
And
ahead.
also your name isn't listed here. So You're,
It's still Byrne. I haven't changed my name.
yeah.
Oh, I think your last name did, it just, yeah, it was, but go ahead, Mr. Kelly, you're up.
Okay, thank you very much. I want to concur 100%. Paul gave you a very concise list. And Megan and Sue Katz both said what we need to do. Look, we're broken. This is horrible. You're in a municipality. This is an incorporated place. In a corporation, you're the board members because you don't have executive power over the city manager. That's broken. We're a systemically failed state. We're not progressive, we're regressive. We don't have fiduciary responsibility as we should. We don't have a chief financial officer. We don't have a chief operating officer. You guys are public servants and you're not paid enough, and you should be working full time and be department heads as well so that other people can run. So we really have to make some systemic changes to this city. I don't believe someone needs to do something about the statistics on how much money and how much protection and how much we save by having our own police force with all those vehicles and a SWAT team. Have you, crime has been down for a long time. And yes, we have some police relationship problems and equity issues, but we could have a substation in our station of Montgomery County Police and just give them the rent for free or charge them rent because we need money. But stop taking it from the property owners. We're not growing property owners. And all that's happening is it's out of control, the appraisal of our houses. If you look, and you guys live here too. So if you live in a house or you own property, you're damned because we keep paying for an average of 2 new employees every year and the new police cars and stuff that basically don't help the public. And we take ARPA money and other monies, and you say, oh yeah, we're getting back county money. Well, that money, we're not getting it back. You, the city government, are getting it back. So when we say, oh yeah, we got money back from the county, please put it back in our pockets and don't say it's just to run our city and our funds. This is unrealistic, guys. So many people have talked to me and they go, Byrne, would you please go? And I'm a blunt person, but I care passionately about my city, and everybody who knows me knows that I want to have a better city. And if we can't do it through you guys, then I'm going to start a referendum and do it that way so that we can change things. And I mean the charter. I mean that you, mayor, and you council people have much more power, and you represent us fair and square. And the city manager takes care of the business of the city and doesn't play favors to out of control salaries for people in small jobs. I looked at the housing community development position. I would love to make $112,000 and I'm worth it, but it's too much. I want everybody to be at the median of 103,000 max of the county. And I want you guys to not raise taxes this year at all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Mr. Dreyer's next.
Thank you. Well, I mean, you're hearing some passionate and eloquent testimony. I think, I've been here for 37 years. My wife and I moved to the DC area. We settled on Tacoma Park because it had a personality that we really were attracted to. It had diversity. It was eclectic. It had spunk. I think we're at an existential moment. I think we are at a point where, looking back, people will say, well, this was at the turning point when Tacoma Park became Bethesda. We are seeing properties sold all around us for more than $1 million or $1.5 million. And that's the property market. But people like my wife and I, who are now retired, our property taxes are our second largest expense, second only to our mortgage, and very close to the expense of our mortgage. And they go up every year. And our mortgage, of course, doesn't. But every year, more of what we have to pay is from our property taxes. And we're on a fixed income. It just seems to me elementary that you folks should recognize that the pressures you're putting on the population of Tacoma Park by raising taxes are preferentially driving out poor people, senior people, people who are retired, people who have limited incomes. And if this is a social engineering exercise, if this is what you want, if you really want Tacoma Park to become a city of rich people, then continue this course of raising the budget every year, raising taxes every year, raising our appraisals every year. But I don't think that's what you intend. I think it's an unintended consequence, but it's real. I think what's happening is devastating for the fabric of our community. I agree with everything everyone else has said about how you really can't continue down this path. It would seem to me elementary that you would ask the city manager to prepare a level budget and identify the places where the level budget can't maintain needed levels of service, and then justify additional expenses to do that. But instead, you've got a budget which calls for a 9% increase. And you're hearing people say that they have no confidence in the system that led to this budget, that it actually was a rigorous system, and that all of us should have to pay on top of what we're already paying, which is already at 50% more than anybody else in our neighborhood, more than Silver Spring and other areas. We're really at a point where Takoma Park will stop being the city that we know and love, because people like my wife and I and all the other people that have testified here will be driven out by the taxes. And that's not an idle threat. I mean, it's a huge expense for us. Anyway, I urge you to reconsider this budget. Thank you.
Thank you. I believe those are all the public comments this evening. Is that correct? Looking at this, yes. Okay. Those are all the comments this evening. We'll begin our budget reconciliation time. And just so folks know, Councilmember Kovar is with us online. And thank you, Councilmember Kovar. And I don't know if the city manager has any comments to begin with. All right, so I will then turn it over to our deputy city manager, who's going to pull up the budget reconciliation list. Before I turn it over to her, just sort of to go over the process that we have is the city manager presented a proposed budget in early April. We have been going through the last month work sessions with our staff to review the budget, listening to public comments. We've had a number of public hearings, and I know my colleagues have had individual meetings across the city. The reconciliation list is the place where the city council proposes changes to the budget. Once we go through the budget reconciliation list this evening, then it goes back to the staff and they prepare the budget documents that we then vote on. And there are two reading ordinances for our budget, our tax rate, and the stormwater fee. And they will be coming up in May. We need to pass the budget by the third week in May, according to state law, because we need to get the tax rate in. So that's our process. And this is where we are with our budget reconciliation. And I'm going to turn it over to the deputy city manager to explain the chart.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, very much. All right, let's get right into it. So we have our reconciliation list here. It's been really a great tool for us year over year to be able to transparently make final budget decisions and decide on the tax rate. But I don't know about you all, but every year I find I need a refresher on this sheet because there's a lot going on. So I did just want to take a few moments to walk through the different cells here so that everyone watching at home, as well as council, understands exactly how it works before we get into the actual exercise. And just for all of you following at home, we do have this posted on the agenda page, so you can download it yourself as we go through it. So first, I'll bring your attention to the numbers here that are in our proposed budget book. So in the proposed budget book, our bottom line is that we proposed a total of 27.8 million in revenues and 34.8 million in expenditures. And those two numbers are also listed here. So the green box is all revenues and any revenue changes that we'll be making this evening. And then the pink box is the expenditure side and any general fund expenditure changes that we'll be making this evening. Before I explain the right-hand side, I also wanted to highlight that we have our proposed general fund unassigned fund balance here. That's also the number in the budget book. And that is, in other words, our rainy day reserve. And then down here, we have the other funds besides the general fund, which will only make changes to if we make changes to the general fund that impact the other funds. So the 27.8 million that we proposed in the budget book, that was based on a 56.97 cent property tax rate, which means that of that 27.8 million, 15.2 million was from the property tax. And up for discussion during our reconciliation exercise this evening is how will we, if we want to reduce that property tax rate, by how much and how will we achieve that reduction? So for council and the public's reference, we have some of the typical options that we consider each year. So we have our current, if you wanted to reduce the property tax revenues by down to the current tax rate of 53.97 cents, which would change our property tax income to 14.4 million. That would mean that this evening, if we don't want to, dip into our reserves any further, we would have to find expenditure offsets totaling 801,880. Similarly, if we wanted to go even further than the current rate and reduce our property tax rate to constant yield, we would have to make up even more revenue. We'd have to make up 1.3 million. A kind of middle option between those two would be if we reduced to ECI plus constant yield, which would be 53.35 cents or 14.2 million. And that would mean that we would have to make up 967,601. And so below here, you'll see that those revenue differences that I just mentioned are listed here, here, and here. And we have, text over here saying depending on what we choose as our goal, if our goal is to keep the current tax rate, then this is what we have to make up. And then this box will be changing as we make additions or reductions on the left. Same if our goal is to reach constant yield, then this is the goal, and this box will update as we make changes on the left. And then same with the ECI plus or constant yield plus ECI, that's displayed here. So to kick things off this evening, we went ahead and took the liberty of putting in the reduction amount for reducing property tax revenues from our proposed 56 cents down to the 53 cents, because we understand there's a general consensus among council to at least work towards that this evening. And so that is already in here. So you'll see that our revised revenue number, which is, at the end of this evening, whatever this number is, if we make any other changes here, that will be our final revenue amount, assuming we make all our final decisions this evening. That's already been updated to reflect the 801,000 reduction. And then we also had one edit on the staff side that we realized we could do a higher revenue transfer of 20,000 from our tree fund. So we went ahead and added that in. So that actually puts us a little bit ahead. So we really only have to make up 781,880 if we stick to shooting for the current tax rate. And so you'll see that reflected here on the right as well. And we put the cent equivalents over here just for your information. And then let's walk through one. So that's the revenue side. So assuming those are the only changes we make to the revenue side this evening, let's walk through an example of making one change on the expenditure side. So again, this is what's in the proposed budget. Let's say that council wants to reduce exactly the 781. And so we add that in. It'll likely be a combination of items, but just to show you quickly, if we add that in, that means that we're equal here, and we've met our goal, and we've done it, as you can see below here, without needing to tap into our reserves anymore. So our reserves stayed the same level, and we've reduced the revenue, but we've had an equal offset on the expenditure side. And you can see that here, the revised expenditures. So this will be our, at the end of the night, this will be our final expenditure total that accounts for all the changes that we're making in that middle column. And because I entered 781, you can see that the change between what we had in the proposed budget and any changes we made, the revised amount that will show down here. Now here on the right of this middle column, these are all the proposals from staff and council that were discussed leading up to this evening. So these are all tentative items. As council takes a hand vote or gets a consensus around a particular item, we'll go ahead and, just move these over. So for example, if we were to move this item over, you can see that it's updating here on the right. So for example, if let's say that was all that we wanted to do and we just reduced 300,000, you can see that we haven't done a full offset, which means that if you go down here, the amount that we have set aside in our unassigned fund balance will actually be reduced because we don't want to increase revenues. So we are making up the difference by dipping into our reserves. I'll also note that over here, we did highlight if the city wants to do its 17% reserve goal, we've taken 17% of general fund revenues, and that's this number. And then this is what we'll actually end up with in terms of our unassigned at the end of the evening. This box is the same as this box. But you can see that if we were to go higher than or lower than the current tax rate, and we had only taken out the 300,000, we would have even more to make up if we were going to the other tax rates. And so these will update as we make changes on the left. So I think that mostly covers it. Were there any questions from council before we get going?
Councilman Costick, yeah.
Just a quick question. I noticed when you did put in the 781, that the 801 underneath the other 801 on the right side still went to 20, which I think is because of the revenues. I just want to make sure that was accurate. So we're expecting that to get to 20 if we.
Yeah. So these only this only reflects expenditure changes.
Okay.
So we might. We might have to just
for that to get to zero. That's all.
We might have to keep in mind that there's that 20,000 in revenue kind of throwing things off a little bit, but you're right. We're going to have to look out for that.
Okay, thanks.
Mhm.
Great. And I can't see Councilmember Kovar. When we have up the, okay, there he is. I see him on top now. Okay. Thank you. Great. All right. So we'll start walking through the sheet. And I'm assuming everybody's okay with the additional 20,000 in revenue. Okay. And that'll stay there. And then there are two items that would increase expenditures. The first is the MHP grant project for Hillwood Manor. And I don't know if I want to turn over to the city manager to talk about this at all, if this is an addition here or.
This item for the 250 was what council already voted on in the fall, which was supposed to be 125 for 22, 125 for 23. It was not, it was an omission from 22 and omission from our 23 when we developed the 23 budget. We spoke with MHP. They haven't requested the 125 for fiscal year 22. They're going to be requesting both tranches in July 1st. So what we're asking here is just to move the full 250 into fiscal year 23 for that expenditure for MHP.
And I think one of the questions is could we deduct this from the housing reserve fund, or does it need to be added from this year?
So yeah,
Yes.
you can reduce it from the housing reserve.
So we can either add the $250,000 expense here, expenditure, or we could take the money from the housing reserve fund that has about $650,000.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
We do have to show it as an expenditure here because we will add it in as an expenditure it'll show up in the interdepartmental chapter of the budget book as an expenditure. But it will not reduce the unassigned reserve. It will
Right.
reduce the housing
Housing
reserve.
reserve, right.
Right.
Okay.
And that the housing reserve is not showing on this sheet. So
Right.
yeah.
Right. Okay. Councilman Searcy.
So picking up,
Yeah.
so we also have allocated, and I know that we had approved for it to be a grant, but the $1 million worth of ARPA dollars for multifamily rehab.
Mhm.
So to what extent could this be something that would fall under that category?
That's a great question. So is the question whether this 250 can fall under ARPA versus,
Correct.
then I would say that council would probably have to redo the ordinance because you
We treated
gave
it as a
permission
grant.
for the housing fund, not ARPA. So we would have to change that.
Oh, okay. Because of when we did the resolution.
Right, we did in October.
We did it in
before.
October before we got the ARPA.
Yeah.
So in theory, we could deduct this as a multifamily rehab under ARPA. Okay.
If council so chooses, yes.
Yeah, and we believe it would be ARPA eligible, an ARPA eligible project, but we would want to double check with our ARPA manager on that. But it most likely is an ARPA eligible project.
Okay. I don't know how to do this. I'm looking at the mayor. Because one of the things that I am concerned about is if we were to, and I know we're going to talk about this later,
Right.
but the housing reserve amount. So, if we didn't want to have to mess around with the housing reserve balance, leave it for what it is, because we do have quite a bit of, ARPA related rehab things, then it would actually make sense to try to fund this under ARPA.
Right. Or just possibly split it,
Right.
depending. So what I'm hearing is Councilman Searcy is moving that the $250,000 from the MHP grant program not be added as an expenditure, even though I know it's going to show up later on, but that we address this either as taking it out of the housing reserve and or doing something with the ARPA rehab money. All right, so is Councilmember Kovar.
Yeah, just to be clear, if we take the funds, the deputy city manager was talking about how that's an expense in a certain sense, but if it was done that way, would that 250 come out of the 781,000 that we in theory would need to reduce the budget by in order to get back to the current rate? That is budget savings of 250, is that correct?
No,
If
it
you take-
wouldn't, I don't.
No, because
believe-
it's not in the budget
It's
yet.
not in the
Yeah.
budget yet, so it doesn't come out. No,
It's an increase to the expenditures. Because it's
Right,
not
but-
omitted
but
from
if
the
it-
budget and we have to make sure it's put in.
I'm sorry, but the housing reserve, those funds are there, right?
Right, and we can draw on the housing reserve to
Right,
cover
so I'm saying,
this.
if we draw from the housing reserve or we draw from ARPA, those two are equal in terms of their impact on the budget. Is that
Correct.
accurate?
right. The only way that this would increase expenditures if we decided not to use ARPA and not to use the housing reserve fund, but to tap into the general fund for it.
Well, I would support Council Member Searcy's idea if we just would have to make a technical change to the ARPA resolution, if that's what the city manager said. Or the MHP resolution, I would support doing that as a separate step. But that seems like a good approach, since that's what ARPA funds are there for.
Great. All right, so then on that one, then we will not move it over to the column, but have staff come back to us in case we need to update the resolution we passed in October to allocate this for all of it or some of it for the ARPA funds. Okay. Moving on, the next is an increase in additional legal services. Part of this is a lot of Freedom of Information Act requests that I know have come in, and so and it's $125,000 increase. I don't know if anyone has any questions on this. I'm not sure. I think we will move this. Councilmember Smith, sorry.
I've been on the council for a number of years now, and we've had a couple of different attorneys, law firms representing us. I do recall that when there were big increases to the budget of the city attorney, that council would have meetings to discuss why that is and try to figure out ways to decrease these expenses. But it seems like now that we just don't do that. We just discuss this at a budget hearing and figure out ways to give more and more money to legal counsel. I just, once again, think this is unsustainable and it is broken with our previous practice.
I would just note that the city attorney did send us a memo, and the city attorney's firm did not raise their rates last year for us, given COVID and other things. So this was a recent increase, and we do have that memo from the city attorney to council, and we do have monthly meetings with the city attorney that council members are able to attend and ask questions. If Councilmember Smith would like to have a meeting to discuss city attorney's fees, I'm happy to work with the city clerk and schedule that right away. So why don't we move the 125 over? All right, next is a decrease. And the decrease, sorry, I can't read this. Oh, sorry. This is mine. And I was like reading it. I was like, all right. So as we were getting the presentations from staff, it was, we were talking about an increase in the speed camera fund this year, and we can use those revenue for very specific purposes regarding public safety. And so I am suggesting that we move $300,000 out of the speed camera fund to cover some of the sidewalk and street work that we have. So that would be a deduction of $300,000 from our expenditures, because we've been moving it out of the speed camera fund to cover sidewalk and street. Everybody okay with that? All right, we can move that one over. The other reduction I was proposing is I want to thank the city manager for looking into financial forecast consultants, so that I know, as a number of people have talked about this evening, that we can do budgeting into the future, and we're looking forward to that. And we know you have to put the budget together in January and February, and you had two budgets that you were dealing with this year, with ARPA and this one. And on closer examination, we realized that we could take money out of this and still do the financial forecasting and get a consultant to help with that. So we can reduce this by $40,000. Any questions on this one? All right, seeing none, we can move over the 40,000. And then the next one is, when we talked about our ARPA budget, we did have a contingency fee in that of $463. And I'm proposing that we move that contingency fee over now to help us decrease and get back to the current tax rate.
For those listening, it might be
Okay.
clear, it's $463,000.
Yes, 463,000, sorry. Yes, thank you. And we've talked about this at other work sessions. Anyone else have questions on this one? Councilmember Kovar.
Thank you. I did have a question, and I think it was in the email that I had sent regarding reconciliation, and maybe it was a slightly different type of change, so it didn't necessarily show up on here. But my question related to the funding that's in the proposed budget for the atrium project. And I think as residents will, there's funding to come out of the ARPA spending plan for that, but 200,000 of it would come out of the general fund. And so what I was curious about was if we shifted the 463,000 as there is suggesting, but had 200 of that go to the remaining portion of the atrium project, and then reduce the facilities reserve, which I think is where that 200,000 come out of. And I'm sorry if that's a complicated question. Would that end up being a wash in terms of the impact? Because I don't think really any of the atrium projects should be paid for out of general revenues.
So, Councilmember Kovar, so I'm going to try to understand. So the 200,000 that you're referencing, that 200,000 is in the CIP under facility maintenance.
Right.
FMR is where the 200,000 is, not in general fund.
Right.
So what you're saying is to take that 200,000 in an FMR and apply that to the 463 in ARPA.
Right.
Is that? I'm trying to follow your.
But and then reduce the reduce the facilities maintenance by the same amount. If it ends up having the same impact, then I'll let it go. But I just wanted to see if that would.
Yeah, it'd be neutral. It'd be same impact on both sides.
But it would mean that 200,000 wouldn't be spent from the real revenues for that project, right?
I just also want to mention that's an FY22 expenditure. It's not in the FY23 budget.
Did you hear that,
Thank you.
Councilmember Kovar? That's an FY22 expenditure, the 200,000, not in the FY23 budget.
Okay. All right, I'll support the mayor's proposal for the 463.
Okay. Are you good? Do you have?
So I do want to raise the question about, kind of to Councilmember Kovar's point, when we are making recommendations around ARPA-related dollars, is it necessarily the case that we need to pre-identify items that are currently in the budget that are being funded using general funds that would meet the required things under ARPA? So let's say, for example, if we're talking about decreasing the ARPA contingency, we're basically saying, hey, we're going to free up additional ARPA dollars, but that means we have to then identify, like, can we just redirect that to the general fund? Or is it that we need to actually identify projects that would swap out for those dollars?
And I think our Director of Finance has raised this. And my understanding is there's $10 million that we can use and put in for ARPA, correct?
That's true. But our finance director and our ARPA manager have actually been discussing this, because in fiscal year 2022, for revenue loss, we did a transfer from ARPA to the general fund. So it was essentially special revenue transfer. It was an offset for the revenue loss. The standard allowance is a little bit different
Mm.
because it's not a revenue loss calculation. So it's not going to be just a transfer to the general
Okay.
fund. Our ARPA manager and finance director have recommended that to keep the records clean, that we should probably move certain general fund items over
Okay.
in that equivalent amount.
Yeah.
So we as staff are going to have to, the definition of standard allowance is so broad. I mean, it's
Mhm.
essentially, it can cover traditional government services.
Mhm.
So there's very few budget items that will be ineligible, frankly, for that to be chosen as projects within whatever we're doing under the standard allowance. But so we will be identifying up to $463,000 in projects, most likely from the capital budget, because that way we don't have to move positions over, which can get a little bit messy. So we'll be looking for clean projects that we can move to the ARPA fund for clean accounting. And did you have anything to add to that, Director Chung?
Thank you, Mayor and Councilman. Yes, because in the FY22 budget, we had a 1.19 million transferred to the general fund, and we want to track how we were spending that 1.19 million, and it was quite difficult. And we have to get the information from the recreation director about where we actually lose revenue during that year, because we need to just make sure that we have a track record in case Treasury come back to us and ask, how do you justify that revenue loss? We need to provide a record to them. So we're thinking that it would be a lot easier to track if we have a certain type of expenditure, for example, like a capital expenditure, that we can actually track it from the expenditure account.
Mhm.
Okay, so this is why we want to move some of the general fund expenditure, CIP projects, to be used in this contingency, because it's easier for a track record and a better trail record in accounting. Okay.
Got it. And you're still good with this?
I feel good with that.
Okay. Okay. When I proposed it a week and a half ago, you
I
felt
feel-
good with it. I just want to make sure we
Yeah.
still feel good about it.
I feel very good about that.
All right. Oh, she feels very good about that. So I think if Director Chung feels very good about it, I think that's a good move. All right. So I think we can move those funds over then.
Those funds over.
Yeah.
And then
Where are we?
I think we're going to the library, but one thing that I will say is, maybe as we get a little further down on some other items, we may want to flag those items that maybe council would encourage staff to consider whether or not they may be eligible or to consider for ARPA. So for example, the commercial corridor improvements, like we already have an $8,000 facade grant that's under ARPA. So, how does that versus the commercial corridor project work, right? And as it relates to the ARPA monies, and the $8,000 grant just isn't a lot. So not to skip the row, but
Yeah.
that's just something that we need to think about as well. So thank you.
So why don't we put the 463 over and then see where we are on. So if I'm,
Yeah, let's see if we can, difference here. So we have 103,000 more to go to reach the current tax rate.
okay, thank you. Thank you. Councilmember, I know. All right, and then the next item was Councilmember Smith. You want to speak to this?
I have a few goals in this budget. One is to make sure that our revenues and our expenses are the same, that we do not have a tax increase. We've heard from residents time and time again who said that they cannot afford us continuing to increase the property taxes in this city. And the other goal is that we stop taking money from the reserve to balance our budget. So there's a saying that if you need money, go where the money is. So my proposal is taking 1.9 million from the library reserve fund that we have allocated from ARPA and use that to meet the goals that I have set aside for this budget. I think it is the only way that we can do the things that residents in this city have asked us with this budget. And going forward, that we should make sure that our expenditures and revenues match. So that is why I'm proposing the 1.9 million.
Thank you, Councilmember Smith. Does anyone want to second that or speak to that? Councilmember Kohler.
I just wanted to ask a couple of clarifying questions if I could. If I understood Councilmember Smith correctly, this would be a decrease in funding from ARPA. And is there a proposal? What would that money be used for something separate, or would that be determined later?
That money would be used to bring down our expenditures to the 27,838 million that we have right now. So we do not have to have a tax increase, and we do not have to have a deficit.
Just to be clear, can the finance director or other staff clarify, because I don't, based on what we just talked about with the previous item, could this money be transferred directly into the general fund?
So I can speak to that a little bit. So the 1.981 million is the size of our use of reserves, not including the library bond reserve, to cover the general fund deficit. So if we were to identify 1.98 million worth of general fund projects that we could move over to the ARPA, from the general fund to the ARPA fund for easy tracking in this fiscal year, then we would not need to use any of our general fund reserves.
And we would have a balanced budget, as Councilman Smith said, because this entire deficit in the general fund is going to be covered by the ARPA. But we need to identify what type of projects in the general fund, to identify the type of project in the general fund to be transferred to ARPA. We do have a $10 million standard allowance, but this is something that our ARPA manager need to help to identify and select from to fulfill this $1.9 million in the ARPA fund. So we have to work together after the council meeting and tomorrow to identify these projects in general fund and to find out from the ARPA fund how to distribute this 1.9 million in the standard allowance.
And Ms. Chung, would you consider this, if we go forward with this proposal, good fiscal policy?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
If we go forward with this proposal, the $1.9 million to eliminate the deficit, would you consider that, in your many years of accounting, being a CPA, would you consider this good fiscal policy?
this would be, it will actually help us to balance the budget. Yeah, but the key is what type of capital expenditure do you want to transfer from general fund to the ARPA? And is that type of expenditure can be grouped into the standard allowance? So there are questions of the compliance side from the Treasury and from what type of the identification of projects, the CIP projects. And that there are only a handful of large projects. For example, the street projects, and we already assigned that in the speed camera fund. And I don't know if there are any other huge projects in the accumulated amount of 1.9 million that we can select from the CIP. So it's a process we have to go through.
And I would just say this, Councilmember Smith, it really depends on, as you go through budget development, the city, what you're going through. It is always best practice, yes, to have the goal to balance your budget, not use your reserve. But again, there's different strategies that many other cities use, but you always look towards best practices.
Thank you.
Councilman Searcy?
So I guess what I'm a little confused about is the reason why we push forward, I guess, these ARPA dollars for the library project was due in large part to escalating construction costs. So could someone speak to what the impacts would be if we were to that particular project? Because I kind of feel like you're kicking the can, you're balancing the budget today only to get a bill tomorrow. If you're moving forward on construction that you then don't have ARPA to use, you have to use general fund dollars for. So, so aside from cutting about $2 million of construction costs from the project, I guess what I'm struggling to understand the project impacts associated with this move. Well, I hear Councilmember Smith that it would actually help us with balancing the budget. I'm not sure what it would necessarily do to the library project in general.
I would say that you hit the nail on the head. So any reduction in the ARPA for the library, it makes it so much harder for the library project to move forward at that point. There's too many unknowns for us to say that we know today what the true impacts are. We do know that the escalation in pricing, things of that sort, and materials are going up. So we can only assume that it's going to be much higher. But once we go out to bid over the next few months, we'll have a little bit clearer idea on what the impact could be outside of, if you take $2 million from this project, it's going to make it so much harder to build the project.
Thank you.
Councilman DeBala?
I think that was my question, because we did allocate well, I appreciate the creative thinking, but I also think it just creates a problem in a couple months where we moved the ARPA money into the library specifically so we wouldn't have to use the general fund a couple of months ago in order to do the library. And it made sense to me at the time, based on the kinds of people who go to the library, who use the library, are the very kinds of people that are targeted by ARPA. So that part made sense to me. And to take a couple $100,000, we might luck out with the bids, but 1.9 million, I don't think we're going to add 4 million in ARPA. I don't think we're going to get that lucky. But that was my question. Thank you for asking it, Councilmember Searcy.
And I would just say that I do not support the library project. So that's why I asked to take the money from that hole that we keep digging deeper and deeper. So I do realize that there is uncertainty about the cost of the library, but there's been uncertainty about the cost of the library since we went from a $2.5 million project to whatever it is now. And the $2.5 million project, I am on the record voting for.
Councilmember Kovar, did you want to speak?
Yeah, I apologize. I temporarily lost the signal there, so I had to get back on. I do support the library project, so I don't agree with this proposal, and I don't want to ask people to go back over what they talked about. And so I'll leave it at that.
Great, thank you. And I think given the extensive conversation we had with the public when we did the ARPA budget and we discussed this, I also do not support moving the money over. And when I did a quick calculation of the CIP and the general funds, we don't have 1.9 to move over. So it also is a question of we actually don't have the money to do this transfer like we were talking about. And so I don't support moving the funds over either. I think then this one doesn't get moved over. And we then move to Councilman Costick and a decrease in the K-9 unit.
Yeah, I don't need to rehash our extended conversation from the other night, but we had a conversation about the K-9 unit and heard some information from police and also from our Reimagining Public Safety Task Force. Their recommendation, the majority, was to get rid of the K-9 unit in Tacoma Park, and that's a recommendation that I support. I don't believe that we should have a K-9 unit here, and I think it is in line with our Reimagining Public Safety work to eliminate that unit. So I am proposing that we take the funds out from this budget for our K-9 unit.
Thank you. Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you, Mayor. I certainly am aware of all the recommendations that the task force made to this council, and I appreciate the work that they've put into that. And also, listen to the chief and the presenter last week that provided some information on that. I think those of you who know me and have followed my career as a city council member, which has been kind of long, recognize that I've been very critical of the police, some of the police practices through the years, not the least of which was the use of K-9 within the city of Tacoma Park. But that said, I think that this council has a deep responsibility to make sure that our decisions that affect our police and policing in the city consider all of the components and that we make good informed decisions. My fear is that that this removal of this line item from the budget at this point in time is kind of tantamount of throwing the baby out with the wash water. I think that we want to make sure that we are comfortable with eliminating all use of K-9 in the city. And we have heard from our police chief, and by the way, I will remind people that we hired Chief Duvall with because of his vision of policing, and it conformed with the vision that the council had at that time, the time he was hired, and something that I think falls in line with the vision that Tacoma Park residents have for policing within the city. And I think he has demonstrated a great accomplishment, many great accomplishments in realigning our police department to the vision that we have, and that is of guardians of our city rather than warriors within our city. It's been a long process. He's done an excellent job, and I think that at the same time, we have heard on this particular issue several questions that he has proposed as far as uses of K-9, how they are used, when they should be used and when they should not be used, how they should be used. And to just say that I think we should do away with them altogether does a disservice in our relationship with the police chief in not considering the various things that he's put in front of us, the questions that he's put in front of us about, what do we really mean when we say no more K-9? Do we really want no more K-9? When the neighbor's child runs away and they're looking for the child, does that mean we shouldn't call K-9 in from another city, or we shouldn't have a dog that can track a person for that reason? That may be an extreme example, but there are other uses of K-9 and other things that do protect people. There are certainly some misuses that we've seen of K-9, and we've seen them right here within the city limits, and we've seen some mistakes made with K-9. But again, we haven't asked the chief on how those situations could be minimized. And my fear is that if we make this decision without having that lengthy discussion with the police chief, that it is, I would say, disrespectful towards him. His experience as extensive experience in policing, and his leadership of the department itself. I'll tell you quite honestly, one of my fears is that within the candidates that we saw for police chief when we hired Chief Duvall, there was not a long list of people who shared our vision of policing. And he certainly has demonstrated that he does, and that he has moved our department giant steps toward that vision. And I would be sick at heart to lose a man like that has accomplished so much with policing and has so many good plans moving forward. And I would also say that I am unaware of any candidates in Montgomery County that could replace him and at the same time share our vision. So my recommendation is that we strike this from the budget. No offense to Councilmember Kostick, but I'm not saying that we should make a final decision tonight. In fact, that's what I'm saying we should not do, is not make a final decision. We should allow this to stay in the budget, but direct the city manager to not allow the hiring of the dog or training of police officers to be a K-9 unit at this time until this council has had a chance to review this subject in detail with our chief and other experts if necessary. But I'm just asking that we not do this tonight. Thank you.
Councilwoman Searcy.
Great. Thank you so much, Councilmember Siemens. You share my concerns. I recognize the plight and the abuse that police in America have used and have leveraged dogs to inflict on Black and brown people, on my people. So I recognize that wholeheartedly. But I do also think that in order for us to truly come up with an approach that is transformative, we have to have the conversation around not just elimination, but how do we develop the policies around the use? Because there are valued uses of these animals. I would like to, we've heard from the police chief, but there were a number of people, Christy Lopez, for example, that had to split her comments up in like 5-minute bits, which, you know, she's an expert on this matter. And even she acknowledged, like, there are uses and there are ways that we can come up with approaches to either having dogs or the elimination of canines within the city of Tacoma Park, but actually come up with an approach for how we would want dogs that may be used in the county, for example, to operate within the city. What I'm fearful of is that the elimination of this from the budget gives the missed opportunity for us to really continue to have this discussion around whether to use them, but how, and then if not, then how do we make sure that we move forward with when dogs have to be called into our city, an appropriate approach for using them. I think that is what's transformative, right? Versus the elimination with no real solution. So I would echo Councilmember Seaman's sentiment of if we leave it in the budget, we put it on hold. I would also like for the city manager and the chief for us to have an additional work session. And if we could invite folks who maybe have a slightly different view, it would be great if Frederick, if we had someone from Frederick that could talk about what they're doing in terms of the use of dogs, but the elimination of dogs for the purpose of apprehension and how that has worked for them. I think that's the kind of conversation that would be really helpful so that we can have a very informed discussion around the use of canines in the city, but also so that we can establish a roadmap for the policies that would need to be put in place in order to ensure that even if we eliminate the canine units, that we have the know of how we want dogs to work in the city to operate within our external partners within the county. So that is what I would hope that we would be able to do with this item.
Councilman Costa, did you want to go next?
I just wanted to add a couple things. I think I respect the comments of my two fellow colleagues here, and I certainly understand your perspective. I think we've had a long discussion about this. We started a year ago when I proposed it to be cut. I think Councilmember Searcy actually proposed it to be cut last year. And so I think we've had a year and it didn't get cut last year, and now we don't have a canine unit right now. So to me, by having this in the budget, we're adding in a canine unit we actually don't have because we don't have a dog right now. And I completely concur that I think we need to come up with some policies and some plans in terms of how we do want canines to operate in the city. I also think in terms of search and rescue, that's certainly a use, missing child, that's certainly a use that might be very valid of a canine. But it's my understanding that's not something that we as a city have really ever had the capacity to do because we just don't luckily have that many missing children in the city on a regular basis. So I certainly think it's a discussion we need to keep having, but I would urge my colleagues to consider cutting it from the budget and continuing to have that discussion. And if at some point in time we decide it's imperative to make that budgetary decision, that can always be added back in. But I think at this point, it makes sense to take it out. Thank you.
Councilman DeBala?
Yes, I think I was about to say something similar, that this is a budget decision and not 100% a policy decision. I completely agree with Councilmember Searcy and Siemens that we need to have the conversation about this. But as a budget matter, given the budget that we have now and the fact that we do not currently have a dog, I would personally lean to reducing that budget item and insisting that we have the conversation. I have huge respect for the police chief. I remember the interviews also. And that doesn't mean I agree with them on absolutely everything, with all due respect to him. So that's where I'm coming out on this. Thank you.
Councilmember Kovar.
Yeah, I apologize, my signal's been coming in and out. I hope I can be heard at the moment.
Yep, we can hear you. Yep.
Thank you. I agree with Councilmember Costick. We've had the conversation. I think we had a pretty lengthy airing of the pros and cons on the topic in our recent council meeting. We've talked about it prior to that as well. And there are very few issues that we consider here. There are 100% one way or the other way. There are pros to, I can understand that there are reasons, pros, if you want to look at it that way, as opposed to cons for why it could make sense at times to have the canine. But, you know, in the most recent case we had, we worked with the county to assist. And in the recent shooting incident that we haven't had canine for quite some time now. I haven't heard anything that leads me to believe that we've been badly hampered in that way. And I do think, given the recommendation from our task force or the majority of people on the task force, they recommended against continuing the program and of this type of program, I'm very convinced as a policy matter that we should not go forward with it. I recognize the budget savings are huge, although as Mr. Grimes from Ward 1 pointed out, there were training costs as well that go beyond some of what's listed here in terms of how much time the assigned officer has to spend. So the budget savings be more significant over time. But I think as a city, this is something that we should move away from. We should not extend the program, and I don't support continuing back in this canine program.
Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate hearing my colleagues' opinions on this. I certainly respect the task force opinions, but I also very much respect Chief Duvall's position and his opinions. And I really don't think, although we've had a couple of discussions on this, including last week, I don't think we went into the details that the chief has raised. And I think that we owe it to him to do so. I appreciate Councilmember Searcy's support of leaving it in the budget, but directing the city manager not to spend a dime on K9 until this council has had a thorough discussion of it and decisions on whether we should eliminate any use of K9 or to limit it to the use of K9 which come in from outside, who are called in from outside of the city, which has complications in itself, or whether we should maybe spend a couple of dimes on K9. Again, I urge my colleagues to take the risk of letting this brew for another couple of months while we do discuss it in detail. Thank you.
Councilmember Smith.
This discussion about the K9 is a distraction. I mean, it's not going to balance the budget. It's not going to change the tax rate. I don't know why we're even spending that much time talking about it. You know, I've never seen the chief as passionate about, as he calls it, a tool that he can use. If this is what the chief needs to run his department, I think as a council that we need to seriously consider it.
Thank you. This is like deja vu all over again. This is the same conversation we had last year when Councilwoman Searcy put it on the reconciliation. And I was the deciding vote then, and I am the deciding vote this evening. It has been a year since that last time. Last time I did vote to keep it into our budget so that the Public Safety Task Force could have time to discuss this and provide their recommendation. They have done that. I deeply respect our police chief, and I have worked with him. I think in any relationship, to work, you need to understand how to deeply respect someone and disagree. And this is a place that, while I deeply respect our police chief, as well as my colleague, Councilmember Siemens, and his years of experience, over the last year, I have spent a great deal of time thinking about the K-9 unit and actually reflecting on my vote last year to even keep it in our budget. And I think it's time now that we do strike it from the budget. If other conversations in the future convince this council or future councils to reinstate the program, again, as Councilmember Smith said, this isn't going to make or break a budget. They can do that. But I do not believe that as a city, it makes sense for us to continue this program, and I support taking it out of the budget this year. Thank you. So I think we move it over. Sorry. All right, so just do a check. If our goal is to get to the current tax rate, just want to see folks to see.
We have 71,000 to go.
Yeah. All right. Councilmember Kovar, the next number of items are yours. I see the first one up is cutting the contribution to the Housing Reserve Fund.
Would you do our proposal for 70,000 first, so we see whether we get that? And then I can go through mine.
No, I had mine last.
Okay. All right.
No, I mean, I could do, so I guess if we took all of these, if you want to open that door, I'm happy to say why I added the last one. I will say I don't support the cutting the housing reserve contribution. I believe, as Councilman Costick actually raised at our last council meeting, when we learned that even under rent stabilization, the allowable increase for rents this year is 7.3%. I don't think we knew that was going to be the number when we were doing our ARPA allocations. You know, we do have money there. The county is also going to be starting again their rental assistance program. But I am very nervous about cutting any contribution to the Housing Reserve Fund. So that's why I wouldn't support that. I have stated also I don't support decreasing the city sidewalks or the SHA. And I would keep in the commercial corridor improvements as well, because again, I also think we need to be doing what we can to support our small businesses in the community. So the $70,000 to take out of the facilities maintenance reserve was after meeting with city staff and Director Chung, our finance director, to look at what was allocated for the facilities maintenance reserve contribution at $200,000 this year. After conferring with staff, they felt comfortable that we could cut 70,000 from that for this year's budget. So for me, I'd rather keep it in because obviously it's good to keep money in reserves. But that's why I had it here, Councilmember Kovar. So I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about the items that you've put here.
Yeah, and I apologize that my signal's coming in and out, and so I'm going to speak a little faster than I usually do, which is probably already too fast, just to try to explain. So I'd say a couple of points. First of all, and this was discussed by some of the public commenters, but with a combination of the county and tax, even if both those numbers stay the same, and someone had, say, a 10% higher assessed amount for this year, maybe 30% overall. So on a $600,000 property currently worth $600,000, and if it was going to be taxed on 660, a 10% increase for the, and then both the county and the city taken together, that's an addition of about $750 in an additional tax bill. A home or a property that's assessed at a little below the median price here in the city. So we're talking about
Councilmember Kovar, can you hear us?
reductions because those are one.
Councilmember Kovar, you froze, so we may have missed. Can you hear me?
If you can hear me again. So I think it makes sense to do one-time reductions of capital expense. So to me, the housing reserve, we have a lot of money going toward housing projects. Initially, I'm a strong
Councilmember
advocate.
Kovar, why don't you try turning your video off? And you may have a better audio connection if you turn your video off. You're bad. Do you want to try and just call him, Jesse?
Okay, can you hear me now, Mayor?
Yes, we can hear you now.
I'll really go quick here. Okay, I'm sorry. So I think one-time reductions in some of our capital expenses, even though the things that I do support, I think we can get by with them for not doing these things for 1 year. So I would propose a lot of funding for housing in ARPA, so we can get by without that. And I think that holding off on the other items on a 1 year basis is not going to prevent any major advances from being made in the city. And we're in a special circumstance now with big reassessments and ARPA. And maybe I lost my signal again.
No, you can, we got you. We hear you. Councilman Searcy?
So I kind of shared Councilmember Kovar's sentiments. So with the ARPA funds, we are making substantial investments in this area. And so I was torn about whether or not we could forego, and again, it's not to make this the habit, but could we forego if we have $1 million in multifamily housing renovation monies available? We have $750,000 towards emergency rental assistance. We're putting multiple $1 million towards like social service programs. Like, could we forego a 1 year contribution in order to alleviate some of the tax burden for the single family homeowners? And I think that we could. I think the same is true for the commercial corridor improvements. I think that is something that we could fund under ARPA, and it wouldn't necessarily have to come out of the general funds. I think it makes sense. We already have a facade grant. Makes sense to add that $100,000, especially if we're already decreasing the ARPA contingency, and the whole purpose of the contingency was to fund new projects, right? So I think that there is some room as it relates to the housing reserve and the commercial corridor improvements where we can leverage the ARPA in a way to result in a $200,000 cost savings to the general fund, which could put us a little closer, or actually send us over and put us maybe even within the range of ECI and constant yield. So that's just my thought about that.
Mr. Fox, did you want? Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just with the 100,000 in capital for the commercial center grant, that's for continuation of those facade grants. And the 100,000 that's in for the reserve fund. The reason it's in there just because you all have a resolution or ordinance that designates that we had to propose something in the housing fund. So it'd be up to the majority of council whether you want that in or not.
Thank you. Councilman DeBala.
Yes, thank you. Couple things. because I'm also thinking about years going forward, I'm uncomfortable with going below current tax rate. We have kept it level for several years. Yes, there's out of respect for all the people, myself included, who have got huge assessment increases. I understand that, but I also understand that next year it isn't going to be any easier. It's going to be a lot harder. So my personal goal is to stay with the current tax rate and not try to go further down the line to constant yield. That said, I also thought about the housing reserve and the commercial improvements in particular. On the housing reserve, because we've just decided to use $250,000 out of it for the Hillwood Manor project, which I completely support, I'm thinking it might be a good idea to put some of that money back. The commercial improvements, I would support reducing that. And we have already taken a pretty big whack out of sidewalks and roads in fiscal 22. So I'm not as excited about cutting those again in fiscal 23, because we do want to keep those projects going on a fairly steady basis and not get behind on them. That's my thoughts at the moment.
Before I turn over to Councilman Costick, I just want to say one other thing about the housing reserve, because we did have, forgot the woman's name, who came and talked to us about TOPA and trying to purchase her building. And I think Councilmember Siemens and I know of another group that's trying to purchase building. I think we may be seeing more of these types of examples as we know the trend has been, especially for some of our smaller garden style apartments, for the owners to be starting to sell them. And I think the more we can do in this area, it's going to be important. And so again, $100,000 isn't a huge amount of money, but I'm just going to make another pitch for that, for keeping some regular contribution to the housing reserve. Councilman Costick?
Thank you. I would like to see us make the contribution to the housing reserve fund, because as some of my colleagues have raised, I think it's important to continue to build up that fund. And we don't know what the future is going to hold, and we don't know when we're going to have these opportunities to invest. And the vision behind the reserve fund is that we do keep a fairly large pot of money available that we wouldn't otherwise have to draw on. And I think, especially given that we're looking at the MHP grant possibly coming out of ARPA or from the housing reserve, I think it's really important to have that $100,000 contribution. And as the mayor mentioned earlier, I'd really like to see some of those funds possibly dedicated to help renters with the potential for a greater increase in rent this year under rent stabilization. So I think that's a really important contribution. We're already looking at, through the budget amendment, cutting significant work on sidewalks in the city for this year. So I am very opposed to cutting any further on SHA or city sidewalks in the coming year. I think the commercial corridor improvements are really important. I would be open to cutting 20,000 off of that, or some small amount off of that, if it helps us get down to the current tax rate. And I do think it's really important we get to the current tax rate. But I also think that does provide support for our small businesses, which have been struggling throughout COVID, and really do provide a value for our residents. And we talk about climate change and people being able to shop and walk within our community to access restaurants and shops and all kinds of places that make it a special community. So to me, being able to invest in our commercial properties is really important. And especially, I like the fact that these funds are targeted towards properties that don't have a lot of private investment and don't have a lot of other opportunities. So like I said, I would not support cutting those at 100,000. I'd be open to a smaller cut if that's necessary. But I think it makes sense based on what I've heard to maybe focus that in the facilities maintenance reserve instead.
Great. Councilwoman Susie.
To be clear, I'm not proposing cutting the commercial corridor improvements, but using ARPA dollars for it. So we talked about that with the decrease in the ARPA contingency of 463,000, that we have to identify projects within the CIP that would fit that definition. And what I'm saying is that the commercial corridor improvements fit that category. And we already have facade grants as an ARPA program, but we only obligate $8,000 towards it. So in theory, what you could do is take that commercial corridors improvements out of the general fund and put it in the, as basically an item that would go against that decrease in the ARPA contingency. So you wouldn't have to cut anything from it. You would just use ARPA dollars for it.
Thanks.
Right, we have to make sure we're not double counting.
Yeah, that
things.
would be double counting. So that's fine. If you wanted to break this out, start breaking this out already into specific projects, we can count commercial corridor, but that would mean that here would be a 0. So you wouldn't
Right.
gain an additional. Oh, okay, great.
Yeah, I get it now. Thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah. All right. So let's go down each of these. The first is, let's see, how about we raise hands, all those in favor of decreasing the housing reserve contribution? Raise your hand if you are in favor of reducing the housing reserve contribution by $100,000. One, and I'm assuming Councilmember Kovar is continuing to support his proposal. Okay, so that doesn't get moved over. Next is reducing city sidewalks by $160,000. Raise your hand if you support that. All right, seeing none here. All right, and then the other is, I'm going to do two things on this one. One is who wants to take out of the budget the commercial corridor improvements at $100,000. All right, who here wants to allocate, as Councilwoman Searcy said, the ARPA dollars towards that? So it still says a 0, but we're actually saying affirmatively to Director Chung, when she's moving that $460,000 over, we want $100,000 to go to the commercial corridor improvements. So raise your hands if you want that $100,000 to be designated for ARPA dollars. All right, that's just a 0, but you can make a note there on that. I don't really know what to do with the SHA sidewalks because we don't have a dollar amount there.
Well, that's 350,000.
Okay, that you wanted to take out the whole amount. All right. All those in favor of taking out the entire amount for the SHA sidewalks at 350,000. All right, seeing none there. And then the last item, as I mentioned before, is the facility maintenance reserve contribution. I will up that to $72,000 as a transfer. So if we take out the $72,000, I think that will bring us to our current tax rate that we have now.
Excuse me, Mayor, point of order. Did you intend to skip city sidewalks? Or did I just zone and?
You
didn't hear
zoned. I
say
said,
it?
I mentioned them and nobody raised their hand.
Oh, okay.
I
Thank
did.
you.
I went through all those. Yeah.
Mayor, if I may, just to be clear, and I apologize again that I'm the remote person, but on the 4 items that I proposed, I did raise my hand on all of those. So just to.
Yeah, I did mention that, Councilmember Kovar. I said, unless I heard from you, I would
Okay,
imagine
great.
you supported
Thank you.
your own.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, so WC Clark, if we could make the facilities maintenance, or you all can make that let's see, is anyone object to the $72,000 out of the facility maintenance reserve? Seeing no objections, that can go there. Any other, so now looking at the list, does anybody want to suggest changing any other items to add? Okay. So I think if we do this, we get to our current tax rate. And under this scheme, we are able to keep money in our housing reserve fund, help people who are maybe facing issues with in need of rental assistance, moving residents from renting to home ownership, We are keeping in place our infrastructure dollars on creating sidewalks and our road rehabilitation, helping our small businesses. Yeah, and keeping our tax rate the same as it was last year. Any other questions, comments? Councilmember Smith?
I just want to go on the record to say that I will not be supporting this budget. It does not meet the goals that I initially stated when we went through this process.
Thank you, Councilmember Smith. Any other comments?
Mayor, this is Member Cobra, if I can comment as well. I do hope, and we can, when we vote on this on May 11th and May 18th, but I think in past years, we've had a brief or a follow-up or an opportunity to talk about how the budget process would work in the future. And one of the things I'm interested in exploring, and I know we've talked about it in the past and we've never really got, we could have a budget that would have a few different options at different tax rates. So this is not the evening to discuss that, but I'd like to put on the table for future discussion the idea of having a budget process session, at least one, if not more, where we can get into some of the questions that a number of the residents spoke in public comments referenced this evening and also in the written remarks.
Thank you, Councilmember Kovar. When you're back in town, I'm happy to sit down
Yes.
and talk about that. Councilmember Siemens?
Thank you, Mayor. Last year, during the budget, as you said earlier, that we left the K-9 unit in the budget so that we could have a comprehensive discussion of what we want to do. We didn't have that discussion in the last year. I would ask that we get a date on when we can do that.
Great. And I actually said when the task force, I voted to have the task force review it, and the task force did and gave our recommendation. But any council member can ask for a work session. We can have a deeper discussion on K-9 in the future. And if other council members want to advocate for putting that back in the budget in a future time and starting up the program, you're more than able to do that at any point.
I will seek that support. Thank you.
Okay. Councilmember Duvall?
I think that several of us said not that necessarily to put it back in the budget, but to have a policy discussion.
I
about
think the city attorney did send a memo that I would suggest
Okay.
folks read.
All right.
So regarding that topic.
While I have the floor, I'd like to just catch everybody up briefly on property tax credits. So now that there's a data analyst in the city who has provided all sorts of great information, we're back rolling on working on alternatives for the council. And so I did not request additional money tonight, you might have noticed. But I have a couple of estimates and I would like to, I think I would like to request a work session at some point in the
All right,
future.
all
on
these
that
work
topic.
sessions, you all got to email me.
Yeah, I will.
And
I will.
CC the city clerk, and we will get to them. Yeah, when we
Thank you.
can. Thank you very much. I wanted to say thank you to Director Chung, to our city manager, to our director, city manager, deputy city manager for running the show this evening. And we look forward to having the budget come before us for a vote in a week and a half. So thank you all. Have a good evening.